Good evening, everyone in Lukman Nation. Welcome back to the People's Power Hour, or this week it's Blackonomically speaking in Lukman Nation. And it's me, the People's Prophetess, Jackie Lukman. I am back. I have returned from my mandated rest period after surgery. Very glad to be back. Glad that you all have joined us tonight. Thank you so much for joining Nwadi and James and JCC, a new member. What's going on, JCC? Thank you so much. And Alex Marquez Perez, Kenda Ruap, Mani Now, Camille. Y'all coming in here. Thank you so much. Good to see you all. Yeah, it's been a bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about my shenanigans a little bit later on, but it is the third Friday in the month, and you know how we do here in Lukman Nation. We have Blackonomically speaking on the third Friday with our guest, our special guest. Well, he's not a guest anymore. This is his show. Dr. Linwood Tauheed, PhD, Associate Professor of Economics and Director, Center for Economic Information at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And he will be joining us in just a minute. But before I bring him on, I want to remind you that if you are watching on Black Power Media, the most dangerous platform on social media, that's where you're watching Lukman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media, you should subscribe to Black Power Media if that's where you're watching. You can also support Black Power Media on Patreon, patreon.com/Black Power Media. But you can also support Lukman Nation on Patreon too, patreon.com/Lukman Nation. We appreciate your support. There's a lot to talk about because this debt ceiling deal, y'all, this debt ceiling fell on us, did it not? It did. And we're going to talk about how it did with our friend and resident economics expert, Professor Linwood Tauheed. Dr. Tauheed, thank you so much for joining us again. Thanks for being back.
It's always a pleasure. Look forward to doing this every month, and so it's my pleasure.
So, where in the world do we start? Okay. So I was reading that apparently Joseph Biden, after he made a deal with the devil in the debt ceiling agreement with the GOP, apparently there was supposed to be talk of using the 14th Amendment to get rid of the debt ceiling. And in typical form, as soon as this deal was made, this debt ceiling deal was made, all talk of that just stopped. Politico is reporting just today that with the threat of economic calamity hovering over the nation last month, President Joe Biden offered an olive branch to liberals demanding he take swift executive action. After the current fight was over, he said it was his, quote, hope and intention, end quote, to push for permanently getting rid of the nation's debt ceiling. The standoff is now over, but Biden appears to be in no rush to try and kill off the debt ceiling. His aides say the topic isn't coming up at all.
Mhm.
So, Dr. Tauheed, not only has Joe Biden negotiated with the terrorists, the economic terrorists in the GOP, over the debt ceiling, but now all talk of him getting rid of the debt ceiling, which was supposed to be an olive branch to the liberals. I don't. Now that's not what is going on.
Well, as we've had a private conversation here, the debt ceiling, of course, is a political instrument. It is not an economic concern, and what that means is this: that the U.S. Treasury is limited in how much it can spend. Excuse me. Should get some water, but is limited in how much it can
Mhm.
spend by law, the debt ceiling law, and the debt ceiling being placed higher than the previous budget agreement. You know, the budget that's in effect now is the budget that was voted on in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
That's when Democrats were in control of the House and Senate, right? Of course, there were a couple of very conservative Democrats, Republicans, Manchin and Sinema, who apparently got in the way of the other Democrats getting the things they wanted. That's the story. But the budget was set at above what the debt ceiling law allowed the country to go into debt for. And so, in order to, I guess, legally, if not constitutionally, but in order to legally, I'm using my words carefully here, maybe more carefully than I should.
I
But
noticed, but
in,
okay.
in order for the Treasury, the executive branch, the Biden administration, to spend more than the law allowed, there had to be these negotiations to say we'll raise the debt ceiling so we can spend what we've already appropriated in the prior session in 2022 when Democrats were in control. Now, the Republicans are in control of the House, not by many votes, but the Republicans are sticking together, and they have decided that they were threatened not to allow the executive branch to spend the money that has already been appropriated, and that initiates what we call a debt ceiling struggle. Now, this is a political movement, not an economic maneuver, because first of all, I mean, if we want to look at the political economy, the 14th Amendment, Section 4 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution says that essentially that all debts of the U.S. must be honored. There can be no not paying of the debt,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And the way that the debt has developed over the years is that the U.S. government has spent more than it has received in taxes and fees, and therefore it has borrowed money. It has essentially sold Treasury bills to borrow the money from us and from the rest of the world, from anyone who wants to buy a Treasury bill, in order to finance that deficit, the yearly deficit, which has accumulated into being a $31.4 trillion debt. A lot of that $31.4 trillion has occurred in the last 4 years, or 3 years actually, since the corona virus.
Oh.
But also it started with the Trump administration. Well, recently started with the Trump administration in the Trump tax cut
Aha.
that has reduced revenue, but not reduced spending. And so the Trump administration went into typical deficit. Then coronavirus comes on. The Biden administration goes into typical deficit. We've paid for those things that were needed, and you know, when I say it's an economic, excuse me, a political, not an economic thing. What's always brought up in these debt ceiling and deficit debt conversations, even among economists who should know better, is that the federal government, the U.S. federal government, has to run its household or its budget like you and I have to run our budgets. It's like a household, you know, the conservative idea, and I won't say conservative because every one of us lives by this, that you can't spend more than you make.
Right.
If you do so, you're going to end up in some difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
That's you and I, but the federal government, the U.S. government, has the ability to create money.
Right.
That's what a bond is.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it is an offering to those who want to loan you money, make a loan.
Mm-hmm.
And if you and I were to say, hey, we're running a deficit this year in our spending, and we were to offer our friends and family a bond, saying, we'll pay you, 5, 5% interest until you redeem the bond, make it redeemable in 10 years, 5% every year. Um, if we have good credit and people believe that we're going to pull out of this, then we can borrow the money. But if not, we're on our own.
Right.
The U.S. government has issued Treasury bonds, and people continue to buy them.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So there is no fear out there among investors that the Treasury bonds are going to become worthless or unpayable. People are buying, and those are people in the economy who benefit from the interest that's being paid. And so the federal government, as long as it can sell bonds, create bonds, and those
Mm-hmm.
bonds are created out of thin air. They're created out of the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. They're created, and if they're sold, then it's because people believe that they're going to get their money back plus interest. You and I might have a problem, but the federal government, the U.S. government, as long as it's here, is going to be able to pay off its debts.
Mm-hmm.
So now that's one level. Another level, of course, if we're thinking about what's called modern monetary theory,
Mm-hmm.
would say that the government, federal government, doesn't need actually to borrow any money. It can simply create money.
Just
It has a
create it.
printing press. It can just
Mm-hmm.
because what's the difference between a country creating a bond and selling it to get money and creating the money? What's the difference? Well,
It's cutting out the middleman.
it cuts out the middleman. So we're going to have that process going, right?
Right.
Most of those treasury bonds are not owned by working class folks. They're owned by the very wealthy. And so it is in the interest of the finance institutions and wealthy persons for the U.S. government to continue to create bonds, to sell, to get money, to spend, but that money also creates interest income for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you are a billionaire and you buy $1 billion worth of treasury bonds at 5%
Wow.
per year,
Mm-hmm.
what is that? Quick math: 10 million
Mm-hmm.
a year. Oh, excuse me, 5 million a year. Yeah, five
Yeah.
million. Yeah,
5 million.
5 million a year. And if you have a lifestyle that you've got $1 billion, but let's say you're frugal, you spend less than 5 million a year. You don't have to do anything else. You can live on your bonds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, Most of us don't have enough bonds, if we have any, to do that.
Right.
But the very wealthy can do that. And so there's nothing that politically is going to interrupt the process of them having income. So the U.S. government is going to create bonds to sell, even though it doesn't have to create bonds to sell to get the money to pay its debts. It can simply create money. And so that's why it's a political, not an economic situation. It's done so that the politicians can continue to funnel money to their donors, who funnel part of that money back to them in campaign contributions.
Mm.
Only one other country, by the way, in the world has a debt ceiling. It's Denmark, and
Interesting.
and they had the foresight to set their debt ceiling so high
That
that,
they'll never reach it.
that they never have any struggle over it.
So maybe you've already answered this question. Nwadi asks, why didn't they, the Democrats, raise the debt ceiling when they passed the spending bill?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, there's been much written on the fact at the time that the Democrats were in charge of the House and the Senate. They're still in charge of the Senate by one real vote. But as the election 2022 election came about, and they saw that the Republicans were going to be in control of the House,
Mm-hmm.
they should have been thinking, someone should have been thinking, well, the Republicans are going to put us into a debt ceiling fight, because that's what they said they were going to do. You didn't have to look far. And the Democrats could have, in the lame duck session between the election, 2022 election in November, and the new session of Congress in January, the lame duck session, they could have uh, eliminated. They could have raised the debt ceiling
Hmm.
way, like Denmark has, way above what's necessary. Make it $250 billion. Or they could have just voted to eliminate the debt ceiling in completely. You had the Congress, you had the House of Representatives, you had the Senate, you had the
Hmm.
president.
Hmm.
All Democrats, they could have done that, and there would have been no reason to have a debt ceiling struggle because there would have been no debt ceiling. Nothing would have changed economically.
Hmm. So the sky would not have fallen
It would
on
not,
the
yeah.
US economy. That people, that homelessness wouldn't have skyrocketed to 89%, and corporations wouldn't have imploded, and everything would have been fine had the debt ceiling been abolished.
Well, I don't know about fine, but it would have been the same. Everything would have been the same as
Everything
it
would have
was.
been the same
Nothing
for
would have changed.
us.
Right, right. And so the debt ceiling was law was passed. I'm thinking 27. I'll check that. Um, uh, because it was by a Republican. I think it was Woodrow Wilson
Hmm.
administration. The U.S. was on the gold standard then,
Hmm.
which meant that the U.S. was limited in how much of a debt it could create by how much gold was in the Treasury. Now that nonsense, I say nonsense, was removed in 1972 by Richard Nixon, right?
Right. Hmm.
And the sky didn't fall. You didn't have anything that happened the day before and the day after the gold standard was eliminated. It was the economy rolled on. In fact, it had been limited by the gold standard, right? Because if you create too much money and you don't find new gold, then the value of your money,
Right. Hmm.
declines. And so what the U.S. the U.S. was concerned about after World War I was that there were countries that had U.S. dollars that
Hmm.
were raiding the gold reserves and just pulling money out, and that continued on through the Vietnam War, where the U.S. is borrowing money, people are getting U.S. dollars and getting gold, and Nixon said, no, we can't sustain that, so we'll stop the debt ceiling. Excuse me, stop the gold standard. And the economy continued to not only roll on, but actually started to grow
Mm.
because of that lack of constraint. That's the same thing that the debt ceiling does. The debt ceiling constrains the economy from growing.
Wow.
And so it was put in place by Republicans under a gold standard regime. Once that gold standard regime was gone, there was no need for a debt ceiling. It should have been
Wow.
it should have been repealed then. But it's become a very convenient club for Republicans to hit Democrats over the head, and the Democrats keep sticking their head out to get hit. It's not like they're trying to prevent
Nope.
themselves. And so they go into this debt ceiling thing, and they come out with severe cuts to SNAP, and restrictions or new regulations on who can qualify, and also that persons who are receiving food stamps and other assistance have to work at least 20 hours a week in order to qualify for food stamp assistance. Now, if you can't find a job,
How are you going to meet the requirement to work in order to?
in order to be able to feed your children, this is okay. This is what happens when greed rules the roost. This is a
Mhm.
political thing, not an economic thing.
Wow. Yeah. So let's talk about this deal
Hmm.
that the Democrats made, because this is not a deal. This was not a negotiation. This was a hostage situation.
Hmm.
And the working class and the poor in this country were the bargaining chips.
Hmm.
And we were ransomed off.
Hmm.
basically, to the GOP, to the economic terrorists in the GOP.
Hmm.
And it wasn't done, Dr. Tauheed. Please correct me if I'm wrong. The Democrats, Joe Biden, didn't put up a fight.
No, in fact, by the way, someone I think just put up a message that 5% of a billion is 50 million. Yeah,
50, yes.
yeah, that's correct. It wasn't five. We were incorrect before.
Great.
But no, Joe Biden, not only did he not put up a fight early in the negotiation with McCarthy, McCarthy had his people there, his second, third,
Hmm.
and Joe Biden had Schumer maybe Hakeem Jeffries, who's the leader of the House.
Hmm.
There in the room while he was negotiating, and every now and then, the story is that every now and then Joe Biden would say something that he wanted to give away, and Schumer would interrupt, saying, "No, no, we can't do that." And so eventually Biden put Schumer and the other persons out of the room.
Wow.
So he was the only one there. In other words, he wanted to give things away, but he didn't want anyone to know how easily he was giving things away. And so he put the Democrats out of the room, and that came to the deal. Now, this deal is not as bad as it could have been with a Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden, for example, one of the things that the Republicans have wanted and have wanted since 1936, when Social Security was put into place, one of the things they wanted to do is to destroy or privatize Social Security. And Joe Biden, for 40 years as a senator, also wanted to reduce Social Security. He wanted to have severe cuts to Social Security. He was in favor of a balanced budget. There's this thing called the Balanced Budget Amendment, which says that the U.S. government must balance its budget every year. It can only spend what it brings in taxes. Well, if that were the case, then the federal spending would have to be reduced by 30%.
Wired mode.
The federal government only brings in 70% of what it spends every year in taxes. So we would have a severe cut. Now, that would probably not mean any cuts to military spending. In fact, military spending would probably continue to go up, but
Hmm.
that would mean everything else would go away.
Wow.
You know, so 70% cut, excuse me, 30% cut would be drastic if we had a balanced budget amendment. But we don't need to balance our budget. The federal government doesn't need to balance the budget because it can create new money. In fact,
Right.
it needs to create new money. I mean, even if uh, you know it, the population of the U.S. grows 2 to 3% every year,
Hmm.
and so there's a consistent rate of increase in the population, and those persons, as they become adults or children, or as their parents spend for them,
Hmm.
there needs to be an increase in production in order for those persons to have the same, we'll quote, quality or standard of life as their parents had. That means you have to have more money circulating in the economy.
Right.
Right. And if you don't, then people don't have the money to buy the things they produce.
Hmm.
That means that they won't be producing them because there'll be unemployment, like when people will be out of work.
Right.
And so increasing the money supply is something that's absolutely necessary. And so increasing the money supply means that you have more to spend next year than you had this year.
Hmm.
And if you want to balance the budget, then you have to get more tax dollars in to spend more next year. But the balanced budget amendment is a crazy idea. Uh, Not only because it's not necessary, but also because it would not allow the country to the government to deal with emergency. For example, pandemic.
Okay.
needing to spend, needing to create unemployment insurance extra for persons who have lost their jobs and during the pandemic,
Mhm.
or to put in new programs for child tax credits. You know that expansion of the program that took about 25% of children who were in poverty out of poverty, and then they went back in to poverty after the program was discontinued. You would
Mhm.
not we would not have been able to respond to that because there's no money. I mean, there would literally have been no way to have financed that. The countries and modern countries have to do this. If they have to be able to respond to emergencies where they have to spend more than their tax dollars, and balanced budget amendment would make that impossible. So that would be a crazy idea as well. So,
Mm. So at the end of all of this, what happens is the working class and poor funding is cut for federal programs. And my mouse decided to die, so I can't open the article. But the Guardian, I think, is the only publication that I've seen describe the situation that was created by this debt ceiling deal accurately. And
mhm.
they used a word that I've never seen used when talking about the economic situation of the working class and poor, that is ever expanding in this country, and that is the word austerity,
Uh,
Dr. Tauheed. And I think it's noteworthy that the Guardian publishes, not saying they're any better of an
mhm,
imperialist,
mhm.
publication than the New York Times is. But I think the Guardian is in a unique position to recognize austerity when they see it, since Margaret Thatcher and her
Mhm,
austerity
mhm,
theme
mhm,
made the term a household word
mhm,
for working class and poor Britons. So
mhm.
now here we are with the Guardian calling the economic situation that was created with this debt ceiling deal in the United States austerity. Is that where we are?
It's on the road to austerity.
Mm.
It's on the road to those in control of the government, the donors, finance, not the politicians.
Hmm.
Those in control of the government saying the U.S. has so many bills, it needs to pay us first. Therefore, it has to spend less on other people, right? The modern austerity movement, I guess you'll call that, came through the EU
Hmm.
during the last decade. Particularly, well, a country that was particularly hard hit was Greece.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, Greece, you know, Greece went into a financial crisis because they were had high levels of unemployment, didn't have tax revenue to spend and so forth. And Greece, like many countries, have debt that they owe to the World Bank. And the World Bank insisted that the Greeks pay the interest, at least the interest, if not the coming payments on the debt. The Greeks could not do it. The European Union Central Bank would not loan them the euros that they needed to pay. And so what the Greeks had to do was to begin to cut off social services, anything paid by to decrease social services to the poor, of course, and to also decrease any other kind of spending it had, so that it could make room to pay off the debt, right? And that wasn't enough. And so what the Greeks had to do was to begin to sell off their ancient antiquity sites
Wow.
you've got the Parthenon brought to you
Yeah.
by Morgan Stanley or something like that.
Oh my God. That is so obscene. That
Well,
is,
but it certainly happens here with all the arenas, right? Yeah,
it's,
I mean,
yeah, that's true. Not any less
those
obscene.
arenas started out as buildings built by taxpayers,
Right.
And then the benefit from that goes to companies that want to sponsor them, want to throw in a few dollars here and there afterwards to get their name on it. It becomes advertising. All the tourism that would have gone to Greece to these various antiquities, that money would have been hoovered up by finance to pay off their debt. That's a way of getting out of let's say, that's a way of dealing with austerity, I suppose, if you have things to sell.
Mm-hmm.
But of
Yeah.
course, that is the international neoliberal process of putting countries into debt. And then when they cannot pay, going back and say, you've got gold mines, you've got copper mines, you've got lithium, you've got
Mm-hmm.
arthagons, you've got these
Mm-hmm.
other things. You can't pay your debt, so you can pay those debts with those resources.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the IMF and the World Bank do on a regular basis, and they did that, like I said, to a country in Greece,
Mm-hmm.
in Europe, Greece, because they kind of think that the Greeks are a little too Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
I
know.
was actually thinking, I was laughing because I was thinking of the IMF repo department.
Mhm. Yeah,
That,
yeah, yeah.
because that's basically what it is. And
That's what
whatever
it
assets you have, they will come after, just like somebody coming to repo your car
is.
if
Exactly.
you do not pay. Didn't this happen under the Obama administration?
Oh yes,
Did
absolutely.
Obama have a hand in this? I seem to
Well,
recall.
I don't know that Obama had directly had a hand in it, but the idea of austerity was something that I'll say infected the Obama administration,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But it
Mm-hmm.
has infected pretty much every administration since the Clinton administration.
Mm.
We look back before Clinton to people like Nixon and so forth. They weren't interested in not spending money. Certainly, Reagan was not interested in not spending money. And then all of a sudden, we get the Democrat, Bill Clinton, and he balances the budget.
Right.
He goes into surplus,
Mm-hmm.
actually, spending less than that was taken in the taxes, and the economy goes into a recession as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That recession, it was first quarter 2020, 21. No, excuse me, I'm sorry, 2000.
I cannot remember the
2001,
year.
2001. I Man, it's a long time ago. 2001, right
Mm-hmm.
when George Bush the second comes into office. The recession actually started before he came into office, so he could not have been responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Clinton was responsible for that recession because spending with the government pulling back money, spending less than it had spent before. That means there's less money circulating in the economy.
Right.
Less income means people begin to lose their jobs.
Right.
Now there's a connection to this wage or job requirement
Mm-hmm.
in the debt ceiling agreement for food stamps,
Mm-hmm.
and that is we are looking into moving into a recession. Uh, One, mainly because of the increased interest rate hikes from the Federal Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerome Powell has said he's going to keep increasing interest rates until the labor market changes. The beatings will stop until those we're beating no longer have work.
Right.
They don't come to work. We can't beat them. They stay at home. They're okay.
So just to be clear though, just to be clear for people, if people are not clear, so the interest rate
Hmm.
increases fuel unemployment.
Well, that's they don't the direct link is interest rates increases creates a greater burden for people to buy things that they would
Mm-hmm.
buy on credit or mortgages, housing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what housing interest rates are up at like 6%,
Wow, they're back up to wow.
and when they were at 3%, before
Mm-hmm.
this started, the interest rate hikes started. They've gone up because the basis interest rate, it's called the federal funds rate that the Federal Reserve sets, it has gone up to almost 6%.
Wow.
And quite frankly, mortgage rates, I think interest rates are being held down because usually mortgage interest rates are about, or even the prime interest rates are about 3% above the federal funds rate. So prime rate should be about 8% now. They're being kind of artificially held down because the
Mm,
housing industry still wants people to be able to buy houses, but 6% makes it for so a lot of persons not able to buy houses, so they don't buy they're not buying now. And when that process starts, when you have less spending in the economy,
mm-hmm,
then someone's spending is someone else's income. If you don't
mm-hmm.
have the money to spend, because the price of bread has gone up, so you're
Right,
so forth. Then supermarkets sell less bread, which
right.
means they need fewer employees, which
Mm-hmm.
means they lay off employees, and their income disappears. They can't spend, and we get this recurring cycle of decreased spending, increased unemployment that will level off, supposedly at some level, but it'll be at a much higher level. I guess unemployment going up at a much higher level than it is now. And when that occurs, when we start see an increase in the unemployment rate, Jerome Powell says that he'll stop raising interest rates, but he's waiting for that to happen.
Oh my God.
And so the increased unemployment is to be a signal to Jerome Powell that inflation is being handled.
Oh my God. So, creative experiments basically mirrored what you just explained. Now stores are going bankrupt because workers don't have EBT money to spend on food.
Yes.
And let's see, this Chitimacha 1025 says, I read somewhere that they want unemployment to increase because when it's low,
Hmm.
workers have too much power.
Right. Yeah. The term in political economy is called disciplining workers.
Oh,
You- you-
there's an actual term
Oh, yeah,
for it.
there's a term for the process of either making life or income more difficult for workers who have to work, right? They have to have some income. So if you have a job and you need to work that job, and your boss comes in and says, "I'm going to reduce your wages by 10%." Well, if you have to have that job and there's high unemployment, you're just stuck. You have to take that wage decrease. Now, companies do that in a number of ways. In this case, it is the Federal Reserve that's helping companies push down, keep down, discipline workers and push down wages. That's the intent. Um, I think this is my speculation. I haven't looked at it. That part of this is to prepare this country for kind of Joe Biden has promised to bring manufacturing back to the country. Okay.
Mhm,
Well, you're going to bring what manufacturing are you going to bring back? This is part of the concern about China, right?
mhm, mhm.
We're making things. Chinese are making military parts. Okay, that probably should never have happened, but they are making military parts. But they're making parts of lots of other things, and not just manufactured goods, but also chemicals, which are, I guess, manufactured for pharmaceuticals and other kinds of things. Heavy dependency on China. And if you want to bring back a Chinese, um, let's say, a pharmaceutical precursor manufacturing process to the U.S., then you're going to have to pay U.S. workers Chinese wages.
Oh,
Otherwise, the price of those products. I mean, if you bring, if you if you bring it, the Chinese worker is working in a pharmaceutical chemical company in China, and they're making an equivalent of 2,000 US dollars a year.
Mm-hmm.
That $2,000 becomes part of the cost of production of that pharmaceutical. If you bring that back to the U.S., U.S. worker is going to work for 2,000 a year. No, they'll need 20,000 a year, which is minimum wage, right? Uh,
Right, right.
just a
Just
little,
barely.
just a little bit above minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
But that means that the cost of producing those that pharmaceutical goes up 10
Right.
times.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, then there's not enough wages to buy those pharmaceuticals, and so you can increase the price of the pharmaceuticals, or you can lower the cost of labor. And so you're not going to lower it down to 2,000 a year, but with austerity and with higher unemployment, people will take, who are making 50,000 will take 30,000.
Oh my gosh.
So
Just
so that's a connection to this the international political economy. This is not
right.
just a U.S. phenomena. This is happening
Wow.
all over the world because it's being guided by liberals.
Yeah, just want to point out, Emma says that's a low wage.
Mhm.
Average factory worker wage in China is $17,000 a year.
Okay.
We recognize that that was just an example,
Yeah.
to show the disparity in what U.S. workers would have to be paid.
Yeah. If I'm remembering, U.S. Median income is about 60,000.
Yeah, and,
So
and
significantly above that.
but we're also talking about different types of economies, very different types of economies, where China is, they call it, a socialism with Chinese characteristics,
Hmm.
meaning that it's, a mixed economy. There is some capitalism, but they do use quite a bit of the government's revenue towards social spending, a lot of social
Yeah.
spending.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of capitalism in China, not a little.
Yeah, well,
There-
yeah,
there-
that's
There's
yeah, that's
there's
true. That's
there's
true.
big capitalism, and the Chinese have I think used Western capitalism well in building the quality of life of their people.
Hmm.
The average median household income in China has risen by 700%
Yeah,
since 2000.
just since 2000,
Yes, since 2000.
in 23 years.
Yes, the median household income in the U.S. has risen by 7% in that same period of time. So
And
707 is like 100 times.
right, but then we have a government in China that spends, that
Mhm.
does a lot of social spending.
Yes, right.
But then we have a government in the United States that does practically none.
Yeah,
That
and
very little.
yeah, and one thing we should know about that $17,000 is that's not equivalent to $17,000 in the U.S.
Mm.
There is a measure called purchasing power parity,
Ah,
which
okay.
you use to adjust. 17,000 in equivalent in U.S. dollars is higher than the 60,000 equivalent U.S. dollars because things in China are less expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Haircut in the U.S. I don't know, $30. Haircut in China, $3. So
Right.
if you can buy 10 times more in China with $17,000 than you could in the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
then persons are actually better off. And in fact, in purchasing power parity, the Chinese economy is the largest economy in the world and has been so since 2017.
And do I know this is a little bit of an aside and a departure, but I'm just curious. There's all this talk in the US government about, this competition with China,
Yeah.
having to defeat China, contain China, and all this kind of stuff. to win the war against China. Their rise in the. Do you see economic? Not talking about politically, not militarily, just
Mhm.
economically. Do you see that changing? The China being the for all intents and purposes the largest economy in the world and continuing to grow.
Oh, I don't see China stopping, falling into being the second largest economy in the world ever again. I mean, they're the second largest in terms of what's called nominal GDP, in terms of the numbers, right?
Hmm.
But when you go into what those that GDP can buy, they are the largest economy. Again, you've increased median household income by 700% in 23 years. That's slowing down
Hmm.
because China is rearranging who it's buying and selling from,
Right. Okay.
but it's not going to dip below the growth of the U.S. Because it has trading partners that is growing, Brazil, India, Russia, and so forth,
Hmm.
that want their products, and they're a highly industrialized country that can produce lots of stuff quickly and cheaply.
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and so now there's another wrinkle to this military, um, um, I guess, military struggle with China,
Hmm.
is that war is good for weapons manufacturers,
Hmm.
but it's not good for soybean producers.
Right.
The U.S. soybean producers sell a lot of soybeans, or at least they did, to China, right? And
Hmm.
remember, in the
Hmm.
Trump administration, there was the sanctions the put on China that they couldn't buy soybeans. Farmers could, and farmers in this country struggled, right?
Right.
Well, the Chinese have begun to purchase their soybeans from other places, and so other countries are becoming providers to China, and U.S. non-military manufacturers would still want to have Chinese manufacturing because it creates products for them to sell here.
Hmm.
And so we have this struggle that's going on between industrial capitalists and military capitalists,
Wow.
who are, I guess, a type of industrial capitalist as well. But this whole process of growing an economy for increased wealth at the top is the military focus on the military is shutting a lot of very wealthy capitalists out of being able to do business with China, and they're not happy with that. The military capitalism is cutting off the industrial capitalism, and
Wow.
so there's a struggle there, right? Part of that was recognized, for example, when Emmanuel Macron, president of France,
Hmm.
went to China and brought dozens of business people with him to China on his trip. It was a trip that he did, I think, of 3 months ago, so ago. And so he went to China, and he was invited by Xi to come to China, and he did. And he was saying at the time, I don't know what he's saying right now. I think he's still consistent, but he was saying at the time that the EU, the European Union, needed to move away from becoming a vassal of the U.S.
That's that. Oh, I did not know he took a bunch of business leaders
Yeah,
on that trip with him.
that's who he took. He didn't take
Oh,
politicians. He took business leaders,
now
and
it
they
makes
made
sense.
deals. They made
Now it makes
deals,
more
right?
sense.
And so he's, the business people in France are saying, we're going to go to war with China and ruin our business. We can't do that. So Macron went to China with the business people who made deals, and they want to continue with buying cheap stuff,
Hmm.
pharmaceuticals and other kinds of things from China, because if they don't do that, then they go out of business.
You know, when I read the reports about that trip and him making that statement, I actually didn't believe it was true because I'm just thinking Emmanuel Macron did not suddenly grow a spine and decide that I was just like, nah, something else. But I couldn't figure out what it was. Now it makes
Yeah,
sense.
it wasn't just that he was, yeah, saying, look, Germany has been the leader of the European Union,
Hmm.
but Nord Stream, no gas from China, from Russia, blowing up things, and sanctions has meant that the Germans have had to deindustrialize. They have had to
Right.
their factories that don't have enough energy to run, and so and the Biden, I think it's the, I forget the name of the last act, but
It's probably an acronym because you know
it
how they
is
like
an
their
acronym.
acronyms.
Yeah, yeah. But it was the Help America Grow Act or something like that, where there are incentives there are incentives in the act to incentivize European manufacturers to move to the U.S.
Mm,
So you got Siemens, for example, which is a
right.
large manufacturer of medical equipment. They're considering, well, are we going to move to the U.S. or are we going to move to China? That's their consideration. And understand that China has lower wage rate,
Hmm.
and they have people who know how to make things.
Yeah,
the
and
U.S. the U.S. no longer has manufacturing expertise, and so if you're making a high quality, MRI, CAT scan, or something like that,
mm,
you don't want to bring it to the U.S. because they don't know how to do that. They know how
no,
to do it in China,
no.
and they can do
Hmm.
it efficiently and cheaply. And so, but there are incentives in that to draw European manufacturing to the U.S. And so yeah, that's part of Macron realizing that brain drain and manufacturing expertise drain is going to seriously hurt Europe. It's already, Olaf Scholz in Germany has abdicated his leadership of the European Union, and Macron is standing up and saying, "I'm here. I can lead this thing,
And
and this is
which
how I do it."
and that also answers a question that I had that someone asked me on asked us on By Any Means Necessary, like what's next for Emmanuel Macron. The workers in France hate him. And we were just like, well, he's our first response was because he is such a vassal for the United States, he'll end up, at the Wilson Center or some ridiculous thing like that. But you actually just answered the question in a way that I would not have thought of because that makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
That makes absolute
Macron is
perfect
wanting to
sense
become the leader of
of the
the
EU.
EU.
Yeah.
By the way, at the same time that Macron and his dozens of business people went to China, Ursula von der Leyen, who
Hmm.
is the chairperson of the European Union, she's the EU chairperson, also went to China.
Hmm.
Same, they were supposed to go together, but Macron went on his own, and she went on her own. And Macron was actually the report says Macron was welcomed by Xi and so forth and so on, and van der Leyen has to kind of wait over on the side in the waiting room. They just let her wait and wait and wait and wait, and didn't recognize she was there until, oh, she had to leave. Oh, sorry, we didn't get to you.
I'm sorry.
So the Chinese, they didn't argue. They didn't say no, you can't come.
Hmm.
Just said you're in our country, so you can't move
Yeah.
around. That's the way it is.
That's just wow. That is amazing. So here we are, being pushed into austerity by both parties of this
Both parties,
government.
yes.
The same government that is pushing with NATO the deindustrialization of Germany, which is, we talked about this on a previous show, how the US is also using this to try to financially neo-colonize Germany. Just
Hmm.
fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
For
Let me say something, because something just came to mind.
Oh, yes.
in this. This austerity talk was very heavy in the Obama administration,
Mm.
and what was around that talk was not to push into austerity, but to try not to look as if you're pushing into austerity. And so,
Yeah.
and what the Biden,
Don't do it overtly, but
yeah,
just
right,
try to don't look like you're doing it. Just
right.
get there.
Yes, what the Obama administration was caught up in is this equal this economic theory of wage equalization. That is, if capitalism is going to spread everywhere, then wages have to be equalized from country to country. But otherwise,
Hmm.
you get so high wages somewhere,
Right.
low wages elsewhere, then people are going to move from the low wage countries to the high wage countries. And the way you stop this immigration, you can move capital around, but you don't want people to move around. You want them to stay where they are. And there's a theory, uh, you know, in economics that argues that as as capitalism spreads, as the free market spreads around the world, then wages in one country will be equivalent to wages in another country eventually. That means that if this is the US and this
Hmm.
is China,
Hmm.
Chinese wages are coming up, but US wages are going to
Are
come
going
down.
to go down. Right.
In the Obama administration, I forget exactly what the discussion was, but the discussion was that that would be a good thing. It is an economic theory, so it must be true. And so the Obama administration was caught into the idea of that U.S. workers are really making too much money.
I love
Wages need to come down to equalize with growing wages elsewhere.
Mm. I like this theory. What about the theory of international proletarian revolution? I like that theory a lot better than the capitalist theory. So that is just wild to me that they actually thought
No,
thought that.
they are using nonsensical economic theory as a justification of, well, we don't really want to reduce wages in the U.S., but we have to because
In order to
to fulfill this economic theory of wage equalization.
oh my
That,
gosh.
that that theory goes back to David Ricardo, 1820s English economist, who was very, very interested in international trade. And a lot of international trade theory comes from his ideas. And they've proven they're driving capitalists to they're driving politicians to agree with the capitalists that, well, labor should be paid less.
Mm, that I'm going to be chewing on that one for a minute. But
Yeah.
so
Important part of Ricardo's wage theory involved the idea of subsistence wages. That
mhm.
is, people, the labor, if labor just makes just enough to buy food, clothing, and shelter, that's basically all they should have. That's basically what the economy is going to drive them to. Now that theory about subsistence wage levels was one that Karl Marx um, took up and said,
Mhm.
yes, wages in capitalism drive to subsistence, but people need more than subsistence to
Mhm.
live.
Right.
And if you can just buy food, clothing, and shelter, and that's all you can do every day, you might get upset.
A little bit. A
You might
little bit. A little bit. So this brings me to where we are and what do we do now? Because true to form, the economic terrorists in the GOP and the complicit members of the Democratic Party who went along with their scheme.
Mhm.
Now the Democrats are up in arms because the Republicans have signaled that they want to actually enact deeper cuts than
Mhm.
what they agreed to in the debt ceiling deal.
Mhm.
And the Democrats are like, "Oh my God, how can you go back on that? Are you
The
So,
negotiation obviously didn't end. That
mm,
was I actually expected the Republicans to push harder.
what do you
But,
mean?
well, I actually expected them to stand with no, we want cuts in Social Security, we want cuts in Medicare.
Ah,
But McCarthy is saying that Joe Biden stopped that discussion. Um, now, I think what the Republicans did was decide that they might get bad press if they
mm,
push for that. And so, they've got a presidential election coming up. They don't want to be seen as the bad guys. And so they
true.
decided to regroup and, okay, we'll agree with this so that we don't have this debt ceiling issue now. But they're not done.
Oh no.
Conservatives, and I say conservatives, not Republicans or Democrats, conservatives
Hmm.
have been wanting to eliminate the New Deal since the New Deal has been in place.
Yes, they have. Hmm.
And from generation to generation to generation, they go about it. If they haven't won in the last generation, they continue to go about it. Obama was caught up in this panel he put together with Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson to the what's it called to put a cap on discretionary spending, the austerity panel, if you will,
Hmm.
that he put in place. Bipartisanship, right, is the thing that allows the Republicans or the Democrats to get away with things. And so what McCarthy is saying is we're going to create a commission to look at cuts in Social Security and Medicare. And by the way, it's a bipartisan commission. It's not
Of
just a
course it is.
Republican commission. There are Democrats on this commission, so
That's
it
right.
must be, it's not just us. And so rather than taking the hit for the debt ceiling thing as Republicans, their next plan is to say, well, we'll both take a hit.
Hmm.
The Republicans and Democrats will both take hits, which means that by the time the election comes about, nobody will be blaming either side for the austerity that they're promoting. It's just the way it has to be because we just don't have enough money.
Yeah. And see that's why we do these shows to explain all of the voodoo, the sleight of hand, and to really be clear about the facts behind all of this political theater. And it is something you said, that and I think that we this is something we need to keep in mind about the GOP in particular. Yes, the Democrats are complicit, but we have to keep in mind about the GOP or conservatives, not just Republicans. I think you have a more accurate description. Conservatives. Not only have they been wanting to dismantle the New Deal ever since it was signed,
Mm-hmm.
these are the same people who have been wanting to dismantle the Civil Rights Act,
Mm-hmm.
affirmative action,
Mm-hmm.
the Voting Rights Act,
Mm-hmm.
the Supreme Case on Loving.
Repeal of slavery.
Let's just do, I mean, everything. The Marriage Equality Act. These are the same people, conservatives, who want to dismantle every piece of legislation
Mm-hmm.
that has provided some level of legal protection or some measure of equality under the law, at least on paper,
Mm-hmm.
that has ever been passed in this country. And here's
Right.
the thing: I think we need to be very clear and understand about these people. I say this all the time, and people always misunderstand me, and I have no idea why, but let me be very clear. These people play the long game. They
Mm-hmm.
don't look at their battles to dismantle these things as something they do every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
They don't campaign openly against it. They're not out there campaigning against overturning the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to. The last time I think I could remember a conservative openly saying, with the exception of somebody who said it recently, but Paul Wyrick, basically the founder of, I think, the Heritage Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
gave a speech. at a convention center in 1980 something, I think it
Mhm.
was, where he literally just flat out said too many people want, they have this goo goo government idea where they think government is good and it's go and they want everyone to vote, and he flat out said, but we do not want everyone to vote. That
Right,
is not in our interest.
right.
It is in our interest to have as few people vote as possible.
That's
And
right.
that is what we, and this was back in what, 80, maybe
Hmm.
late 70s, early 80s, when Paul Weyrich said this.
Hmm.
You're not going to find conservatives saying that.
Hmm.
They're not going to campaign on that. They're
Right.
not going to organize on that statement. But
Hmm.
everything they do, whether it is during a presidential election year, or whether it is running local candidates for dog catcher and school board,
Hmm.
they have their goal of dismantling every piece of legislation that has eroded the supremacy of white straight men
Hmm.
in this country, and to by an
Of,
extension white women.
rich of rich white straight men.
Of thank you,
Yeah.
for that clarification.
Yeah.
Of, because we cannot forget the class analysis
Right.
of rich white straight men, because they will throw poor white people under the bus too.
Hmm.
So when we're talking about conservatives in this way, and they want to dismantle these pieces of legislation that are absolutely imperfect, didn't go far enough, have never
Hmm.
really been enforced, all of that is true, but they did provide a level of protection, or equal protection under the law, or a level of advancement that didn't exist before.
Hmm.
When I say that these people out organize us in order to achieve these goals, I'm not saying that I approve of what they're doing, or that I look at what they're doing and I see any I am celebrating what they're doing. That's a warning,
Hmm.
because they don't have to get out in the street and rail against the blacks, and even though plenty are happy to do that, but the ones who are the most effective in advancing the political aims of dismantling any type of equality in this, they're the ones who are going into the churches with the voters guides and having conversations with people in the churches about whatever their ideology is. They're going to the homeschool folks,
Right.
they're going to, and they're doing it all the time. It is constant. They play the long game.
Hmm.
They're not as concerned about losing the next presidential election if they can get a bunch of judge appointees,
Hmm.
appointees to federal judge, to the federal benches, if they can get a bunch of governors elected, if
Hmm.
they can get folks on local school boards. So they'll wait out 2 years of an Obama administration
Hmm. Yes. And
and be happy to come in with Trump.
yeah.
And
And
that
that.
in that whole 8 year time, nearly a decade,
Mhm.
they're organizing on a local level.
And yeah, and they've been organizing in this period since the 1970s. I think the Lewis Powell memo goes
Hmm.
back to 1972. Lewis Powell, lawyer at the time, I forget what his position is, but he became in 1972 or a member of the Supreme Court, justice of the Supreme Court. But he wrote a memo before he stepped onto the Supreme Court that's now known as the Powell memo. And in that Powell memo, he set out a process. He sent it to the Chamber of Commerce of the U.S. And he set out a process by which business can begin to take control of the country. At the time, we're talking about the 60s and 70s when you had, mass protests against the military, against, white supremacy, at least in some fashion, and other kinds of protests among young people. Lewis Powell is, looking at the country stepping away from capitalism. And he's writing this memo to say to the business community, you need to recruit evangelical Christians into the process of standing up for American values. Capitalism is an American value, and you need to approach these persons. And so you get the Jerry Falwells and the Pat Robinsons and so forth, who are funded by entities that want to have these conservative Christians or Christians become conservative enough to vote for business, right? For the growth of industrial, but now also financial capitalism as it's moving through. That's a process that's been in place over 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Democrats' response to that, I would say, has been lacking, but I think it's been deliberately lacking.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that kind of a personal, in a sense, experience here is 2008. I worked on the Obama campaign.
Well,
Yeah, not in 2012, but
right.
2008, right?
We were all young and hopeful once.
Yeah, yeah. And a friend of mine also worked a community organizer here in Kansas City, worked on the campaign. He went around the nation working. He was paid. I was a volunteer. And after the you know how the organizing went, right? You had your block to block house organizing. You had your house parties. You had all these things that looked like the basis for democratic governing. And then they had the wrap up after the election, after Obama won, and he went to Chicago with other organizers to think about how you're going to have OBA, Obama for America, or turned into Organizing for America, OBA 2.0, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he and others were saying this process that we have is a process that we need to continue on in our communities, to organize our communities. And so that, because we have issues back home that we need to organize against and so forth. That was shot down. It was decided that the Obama for OBA 2.4, OFA 2.0 would go under the DNC.
Where all organizing goes to
It.
die.
And it killed it. Why? Because it's a threat to the Democratic Party. Organizing is a threat, and Obama used it, but he disallowed it from being used after his election by putting it under the control of the DNC, so that y'all folks, yeah, y'all organized, y'all helped me become president, but now go back to being disorganized. I'll let you know what happens in 4 years when I need you again.
Oh boy.
So the Republicans have been organized. The Democrats have been organizingly disorganized. They've been deliberately disorganized because organization is a problem. Now, the Republicans, of course, organizing for them have got them into a couple of problems with the Tea Party and so forth.
Right.
But this is asymmetric. The Republicans want to go in the Tea Party direction.
Right.
So the Tea Parties, showed up, and they actually gained some power. Democrats, these conservatives, do not want to go in the direction of progressives.
No.
And so we don't want to organize on the Democrats, organize on the Republicans, because that organization is going to do Republican things. Organizing on the Democratic side, those organizers are not going to do Democratic things, which is to cave into Republicans. And so we can't have organizing on the Democratic side.
I hope that was clear to folks.
I hope so.
I really, really do, because this is something that we need to stop having a conversation about, and we need to be clear. There's no working on the inside of the Democratic Party to change it. That's not. It's
No.
The Democratic Party is where progressive ideas and politicians go to die. Really, that's just the truth, and we need to be clear about that. So. All right, Dr. Tauheed, last thoughts. What is the what do we take away from this debt ceiling thing that is clearly not over? It's clearly not
No, no,
the
no.
worst, and I have a feeling the worst is not. I mean, because we've already had, but this wasn't even related to the debt ceiling. This was just the Obama administration. Might as well be Obama 3.0. The Biden administration ending the COVID era
Mhm.
um, uh, uh, legislation.
Right.
The Medicaid expansion was ended in April, and
Mhm.
already over 1 million people
Right.
have been kicked off of Medicaid.
Right.
And this was something that Joe Biden did not have to even do.
Right.
He could very well have made the Medicaid expansion, the child tax credit, the CHIPS expansion, the student loan debt
Yeah.
relief. He could have made them permanent, just like the conservatives have made the Bush tax credits, and like they want to make the
Right.
Trump tax credits. But
Yeah.
here we are. What do we take away from this thing?
Again, that this is a deliberate process. It's not accidental. For example, you talked about the student loan debt. Now, the student loan, the debt relief of $10,000 to $20,000 was put into place by the Biden administration, supposedly because the coronavirus emergency gave them the authority to do so. They could do this under coronavirus emergency. It's a lie to say that because the law allows the Secretary of Education to do whatever the Secretary of Education wants to do with student loan debt. They can reorganize it. They can forgive it. They can do that. So the law allows that. There's already law allowing that. The Biden administration, when people would point out this law, was saying, "Well, I don't think the law really allows us to do that." And then he does the $20,000 thing
Mm-hmm.
under a pandemic emergency, after he's already said, "I don't think we have the authority to do this, but in this emergency situation, we have the authority, so we'll do it." And then as soon as it gets, almost immediately, I guess there's a challenge from 6 or 7 attorney generals around the country to that law being or unconstitutional, and Obama yanks away the legal framework platform that his action stood on by saying the coronavirus emergency is over.
Oh, Biden, you mean? Yeah.
Biden, yeah, Biden,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. The emergency is over. So you've got a program that you enacted based on the emergency. Now the emergency is over and the case is before the Supreme Court. I mean, what you've done is given the Supreme Court to say, well, the emergency is over, no program. That's it.
Right.
You
Mm-hmm.
just said you didn't have the authority otherwise, and now you're taking your own authority away. So, that gives me an indication that the Biden administration never wanted to do this, but political optics meant he had to do something. But he gave the opposition the hammer to hit him in the head with, and
Mm-hmm.
so that I mean he does that with many of these things, that he'll say, "I don't have the authority to do that,"
Right.
and then when there's a lawsuit, his own words come back to say, "Well, you said you didn't have the authority to do it, so
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
can do it." So with the Biden administration, we should look for more and more cuts on Social Security and Medicare. Biden again has been wanting those cuts for the last 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's I don't think he's a new man. The book says yesterday's man, and he is
Yeah.
very much not only is he not a new man uh, uh, politically, cognitively he's certainly not a new man. He is
He's barely alive.
he's the same person that he's always been, and we don't expect him to change. And so uh, I guess his approval rating among 18 to 35-year-olds is like
It's in the tank.
20%.
It's in the
20%.
tank. Mm-hmm.
And if they don't vote, who knows who will be president in 2024? I guess things could get worse. which is frightening, right?
I suppose, but I mean, if you're one of those people who
Yeah,
are already impacted by these cuts
right.
to social programs, I mean,
Mhm.
the bottom's already fallen out
Yeah, that's right.
for millions,
Yeah,
millions of people, and the end is not near
yeah,
for more of that. But I
that's
don't
right.
want to keep you. I hear that you have a visitor, a guest, and I don't want to cut into your non-work time.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate you so much, Dr. Tauheed. Thank you so much for being back with us. We will see you again next month, where I am sure we will have plenty of more economic shenanigans to talk about. Thanks so much for joining
Yes,
us.
yes. Financial institutions are predicting a recession in the third quarter of this year. We're here now,
Oh
so
boy.
even I think yeah, it was Chase or more J.P. Morgan economists who were predicting that that recession that's been coming is going to be coming. I suspect that when it comes, it will hit very quickly
Mm,
because we have not only the unemployment numbers, as we've said before, are misleading because we have so many part-time workers,
right. Gig workers. Yeah.
gig workers, and
Mhm.
so forth, and companies are using a strategy of taking full-time workers. You have one full-time worker, you turn that into two part-time workers
Mhm.
because it reduces the need to pay benefits, right? Well, when those two part-time workers lose their jobs,
Right.
that's twice the increase in unemployment as one full-time worker losing their job.
Oh my
And so
God.
I think when it comes, the unemployment rate is going to go up quite quickly.
Wow. Thank you so much. As always, we appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you also. Always excellent questions and good discussion, and your guests, followers. We had a discussion about this term. I don't know what the
I like viewers.
your
I
viewers,
like
your viewers.
viewers.
Okay, your viewers are always on point.
Well, I know they really, really appreciate these discussions, demystifying economics. Why
Yeah.
didn't I think of that as a title? Anyway,
Economically speaking is make that the subtitle. That's the subtitle.
okay. All right, cool. Thanks so much, Dr. Tauheed. You take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you.
Oh, all right. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. So, whew, man, I'm I am not really looking forward to what this upcoming quarter economically is going to be, but I would suggest we really invest in organizing some mutual aid for our people, help people where you can. If you can personally help someone who has been impacted by some of these cuts, do it. Don't let we should not be letting our people suffer alone, because this is all of us. This is all of us. So more to come on that. So, okay, so I told you that I will give you an update on my medical issues. So I did have the surgery, the paniculectomy, where they cut off my little 80 lady apron. That's the best way to describe it. It's so gross. Um, Everything went well. I'm still healing. According to the doctors, technically I'll be healing for another month, even as I like go back to work. I've had, little small, not complications, but kind of normal, weird separations in the incision. Those are closing up. Those are healing well. I for once, I did what the doctors told me, and I didn't go to work, so I haven't been in the studio for a month since the surgery on May 19th. I have not done any organizing at all. I haven't done anything, and I'm just getting back to that this weekend. So I'm feeling pretty good. There is some movement on the kidney transplant front that I can't really say right now because It's not quite official yet, but there is some movement on that, and things are going as they are going. You know, I would be lying if I said that this was easy. It has not been easy, especially after everything that I went through with my husband, Abdus dying in 21. As a matter of fact, yesterday was the anniversary of his passing, so I've been kind of a mess for a couple of days. Then our dog Brewski passing away, his son dying the year after he died. It's been just one unconscionable tragedy after another. Um, and then, the health issues, and doing all of this while kind of still navigating all of that grief and uh, trying to maintain some level of sanity. Please tell me that I am. Please know that I am not trying to be a superwoman. As a matter of fact, there's a great article in Hood Communist this week that I need you to read. I need you to go to hoodcommunist.org and read this article. As a matter of fact, I still have it up because I just finished reading it before I hopped on with you all. So I'm going to drop it in the chat for you. This is a fantastic article that I feel like I need to do a show on. And the article is called Black Women Don't Do Depression. It's a fantastic article. And so I really want you to read it. And this whole economic thing, absolutely, this is absolutely a part of it, because who's struggling the most to keep our families housed and fed? It's Black women with Black men also. I mean, this is, so all of this is it's been a lot. It's been a journey. It's not over. It's been very hard. It's it's been more than I've been able to handle sometimes. Um but the only thing I know how to do is keep going, honestly. I don't have there's no magic. There's I'm not going to sit here even as a person of faith and tell you, "Ooh, I just pray and the Lord." Come on, man. No, sometimes life kicks you right in the teeth. And I don't care how much praying you do. There really is not a lot that there's no answer for everything I've been through. There's no. There's no easy answer for that. So all I know to do is to keep going. All I know to do is to every day I wake up, just kind of figure, well, I must still be here for a reason. So let me get out of this bed and figure out what that reason is, just for today. Just maybe there's something I need to know today. So I've been doing that, and I'm going to keep doing that. And there's no way I could let the legacy that Abdus and I started, there's no way I could let this die. That would be such an insult and an injustice to him. So I'm still here, and I'll still be here. There will be another break in Lukman Nation when this kidney transplant thing becomes official. I'll let you know when that is. But until then, I will see you next time, next Tuesday morning, hopefully on the Remix Morning Show, and next Friday on another episode of the People's Power Hour. Until then, y'all, please check out everything on Black Power Media. The content is really great, really amazing and fantastic on Black Power Media. Please check out everything, all of the things. And I'll also see you Monday on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, you know how we do, y'all. Take really good care of yourselves and each other. And as always, a luta continua. The struggle continues. But I promise, if you keep struggling, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Peace.